Hmm. All right, so here we are. I'm going to start the stream by doing something uh, that I've been trying to get this activity off the ground for quite a while. And what happened was I have a service that you see here, and well, you don't see this service yet, but I have a bunch of services, and those services are communicated through RSocket. So if you're not familiar with RSocket, let's just take a quick, brief trip down ChatGPT lane. Just kidding, memory lane, and check it out. So what is RSocket? And there is an RSocket. Oh, my bad. Yeah. It's too helpful sometimes. Too helpful. Okay, so this is RSocket. If you're not familiar with it, you might want to be familiar with it because it's a great protocol for doing things like communicating over the wire. You might need to communicate a web server, or not a web server, but a publish subscribe type of semantic, or you might just need request response. RSocket does that, and it handles back pressure. So while this isn't an exhaustive look into RSocket, just know that it's a protocol that allows us to send and receive streams of data reactively, and this is on top of the reactive stream specification. So I would imagine that you would want to go to rsocket.io and learn more about RSocket. It is polyglot, so you can basically use it with any language, almost any language. The most important ones, obviously. I'm going to be using Kotlin for this particular demo. And going forward, I'm just going to use the Spring support for RSocket using the Spring Framework's RSocket support. It does all of the configuration, and it allows me to create, easily decorate my RSocket services and requesters with interceptors. So let's move on. Let's just go to start.spring.io. And, in case you're wondering, like, how would I do this? How would I get RSocket into my server? You just add the dependency under RSocket messaging. So this brings in Spring messaging, and it also allows us to bring in RSocket itself. From there, you would create a project, and you would go into code editing mode. I'm there right now. I have an already created project that uses RSocket. If you're watching and you're wondering, well, how do you make an RSocket server work? It's very simple. I have a simple example client right here. RSocket with Spring Boot means you're letting Spring handle the creation of the RSocket responders for you. So in other words, you don't have to stand up an RSocket server on your own. You could just do message mapping for a controller like this guy here, and it will map routes, RSocket routes. RSocket's a messaging platform, and so our Spring messaging naturally fits with RSocket. So you can say, hey, I have a route called shake, and this is going to call a method called shake for leaf, and this is the method that any route towards shake will hit. And in this instance, you have the implementation of the service that will eventually get called. Here we are. This is the complete controller. That controller configuration is a number of things, right? We have an implementation. We have the service definition itself. I have security rules, so Spring Security can get used to, authorized requests. That is, if you have a user logged in, then that user has granted authorities, basically roles. If you're considering adding security, look up RBAC, which is role-based access control, and that allows us to essentially say, hey, for this user, how do I access this method? Can I access this method? And that'll happen somewhere within the RSocket interception under Spring Security to add, the granted authorities depending on who's being logged in at the time of the request. This controller is bounded through multiple interfaces that have one, the mapping, two, the security, and finally the service implementation itself. So this is Kotlin. Kotlin allows you to do that. And while you might not agree with this configuration attempt, I like it. I think it allows me to essentially create all of the different cross-cutting concerns, not cross-cutting, but separate concerns, and put them into their own place. So I have my controller mapping in one place, I have my security in another place, and then I have my implementation yet in another place. And they can be tested independently. And I like that idea, the idea that I can test things independently. I can test my controller without having security. I can test my controller with a mock service implementation if I want. So it gives me some extra flexibility that I wouldn't have if I had to essentially write one single controller. And with that, let's look at some things. This is an example repository that I created. This example repository, it's responsible for essentially letting me play with RSocket. So in this thing, I have this RSocket requester factory that I created. This is my own bean, and my own bean which exposes a requester factory. What I want is the ability to create a requester and then reuse the requester. And that requester can be multiple requesters. I can have one requester per host in here, or I can just have that single requester. Although this is a little bit overkill, it allows me to also configure the specifics of that requester within one place. So my requester factory is essentially configuring my RSocket requester. In this case, it's probably something that I adapted from another project. But whatever the case is, Spring provides a requester factory builder for you already. So let's see what we have here. So this requester factory takes a argument called requester builder. A requester builder is a thing that gets configured fairly fairly early within the Spring lifecycle. So when you start Spring Framework, it wants to create a requester builder. A requester builder allows us to essentially modify how the requester comes out. So we can say things like, I have different RSocket strategies. RSocket strategies allows us to do things like message, message enhancement, message transformation, decoding, encoding. RSocket strategies allows us to essentially say, okay, well, here's how I'm going to map this requester to a route. Or what I use it for mostly is encoding, decoding, okay? But you would probably need to do something if you're using Netflix's